Welcome, dear viewers, to a world where darkness and mysticism meet in the creepiest forms. Here, in this abandoned corner of the internet, we will delve into the darkest corners of the human imagination. Prepare for awe-inspiring horror, as each of our stories is imbued with sinister secrets that lurk in the darkness of the night. Scary stories that remain beyond your imagination are waiting for you on our channel. Don't forget to turn on the lights, get comfortable, and hold on tight, because now we are going into the world of nightmares. Are you ready for it? Then welcome to our scary story.
Serving in the military is a path of bravery, patriotism, and commitment to one's nation. It's a journey filled with risks and uncertainties, stories of heroism and experiences that often leave indelible marks. This story I'm about to share with you is one such tale. A true account from my days as a young specialist in the U.S. Army. Let's call me Robert for the sake of privacy. Like many soldiers, I left the service with more than just memories. My time in the Army, especially the year 1988, was marked by events both perplexing and unnerving. This narrative begins at Fort Campbell, a place shrouded in an eerie mist, symbolic of the obscure line between reality and the inexplicable. Here, stories unfold that challenge our understanding of the real world, inviting us into a realm where fact and fiction merge. As you journey with me, you'll need to navigate through the fog of war, discerning truth from deception. Reflecting on my military days in the 1980s, the shadow of the Vietnam War loomed large. Even though the war had ended about a decade earlier, its impact was still felt strongly. It was part of our upbringing, dominating TV screens and school discussions. In 1984, driven by a sense of duty and the legacy of those who served before me, I enlisted, eager to contribute my part. Throughout my assignments, the Vietnam War was held in high reverence, a constant reminder of the sacrifice and valor of soldiers. We, the next generation, were anxious to prove ourselves. Yet there was an underlying tension, a sense that in this era of peacetime service, our roles were less defined, our presence perhaps less needed. Despite this, we were aware of battalions being deployed to places like Lebanon, Grenada, and Libya, hinting at the reality of combat. But why share all this? Because during my service I encountered events that defied logical explanation. These are true stories, as unbelievable as they might seem. I don't expect you to take my word for it. I wouldn't have believed them myself if I hadn't lived through them. And, certainly, my superiors in the Army didn't believe me when I tried to report these occurrences. In the military, especially during times of peace, there's an unspoken rule about maintaining a rational, stable demeanor. Showing signs of instability, particularly when you're responsible for handling weapons, isn't taken lightly. The Army conducts thorough physical and psychological evaluations before and during service. Any hint of mental instability could be detrimental to one's career, with the military always on the lookout to streamline its forces during budget cuts. My first attempt to report the bizarre events I witnessed taught me a hard lesson about silence. For the sake of my career and, as I later realized, my safety, I learned to keep quiet. Despite this, I harbor no ill feelings towards the Army. I am, and always will be, proud of my service. Yet even after more than 3 decades, these memories continue to haunt me in a way that's hard to describe. Between 1987 and 1988, at Fort Campbell, which straddles the Kentucky-Tennessee border, I encountered a series of extraordinary events. This area is no stranger to the unusual. A quick online search will confirm this. Fort Campbell lies near the Cumberland Plateau, infamous for the Champ Ferguson massacres during the Civil War. It's also not far from Kelly, Kentucky, where in the 1950s the Sutton family's encounter with the so-called Kentucky Goblins took place. If I had known about the area's eerie history back then, perhaps I wouldn't have felt so unsettled by the strange occurrences at the base. In the following narratives, I will share with you 3 of the most bizarre and unsettling experiences that happened to me during my time at Fort Campbell. These stories, rooted in the unique history and atmosphere of the area, will take you through a journey of the inexplicable and the chilling. I first set foot at Fort Campbell around January of 1987, fresh from a short deployment in Central America. Initially, I returned to my command with the 27th Airborne Engineering Battalion at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, but soon found myself reassigned to the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell. I'll delve into the reasons behind this shift later on. Being a Tennessee native, the assignment to Fort Campbell, not far from where I grew up, felt like a welcome homecoming. Fort Campbell is a colossal expanse of land, covering nearly 165 square miles, dwarfing many American cities in comparison. To put its vastness into perspective, it's over 3 times larger than San Francisco and about half the size of New York City. But unlike these bustling urban centers, much of Fort Campbell is uncharted wilderness, comprising dense forests and vast tracts of undeveloped land. This includes rifle, grenade, and artillery ranges. My primary military occupational specialty, MOS, was communications, which typically involved indoor work with radio equipment. However, I found myself spending an unexpected amount of time in those sprawling woods, especially at night. A few months after arriving and being assigned to the 101st, I was given a temporary duty with the MP Battalion, the military police. This was a refreshing change of pace. Instead of repairing radios, I was now patrolling the base, exploring far more of it than I ever imagined. I soon learned that Campbell was a labyrinth of thousands of buildings and hundreds of miles of roads, many of which were remote back roads and dirt paths winding through the outer edges of the base. Night shift security detail was one of the less coveted duties, involving driving these isolated roads and checking on out-of-the-way areas and inactive properties. Often, I would volunteer for extra night shift patrols along these secluded areas. Despite a growing sense of obsolescence as a soldier in peacetime, these patrols invigorated me, making me feel actively engaged in military life once more. Growing up in the area, I felt a certain comfort in navigating these back roads, surrounded by nature and away from the lights and bustle of the base. As you move away from artificial light, the night sky reveals itself in all its glory. I relished these moments in the backwoods, even if it was just for routine checks like securing locked gates. However, not all my colleagues shared this sentiment. Some, especially those from urban backgrounds, were visibly uncomfortable, almost fearful, in the remote, pitch-black woods. Their apprehension, while amusing to me, was understandable. The darkness and isolation of the woods can be unnerving, yet it added a certain thrill to the experience. Most of our patrols were mundane, uneventful. Armed with standard sidearms and rifles, we would drive around in our olive drab green trucks or SUVs, inspecting perimeter fences, locked gates, and occasionally older buildings storing seldom used equipment. The vastness of the base meant long drives between locations. Our routine involved stopping, checking locks and gates, and then moving on to the next spot. Every now and then, we'd encounter people during these patrols. Sometimes it would be soldiers engaged in activities they probably shouldn't be, like secret rendezvous by the perimeter fence. Other times, we'd come across teenagers attempting to vandalize old buildings or evidence of trespassers, like cut fences or remnants of campfires. Occasionally, we'd even find homeless individuals seeking shelter in buildings with electricity. The presence of unknown persons always heightened the tension, especially in areas with numerous buildings offering ample hiding spots in the dark. But of all the places we patrolled, there was one particular site that stood out, eerie even in daylight, and part of our nightly routine. It was a large, fenced-in lot filled with old cars and storage buildings. When soldiers deploy for extended periods, they often need to store their personal belongings and vehicles, as these cars would otherwise occupy valuable parking space on base. This lot was a graveyard of sorts, housing very old, rusted cars, some with license plates dating back to the early 1970s. The civilian vehicles were in particularly poor condition, with flat, dry-rotted tires and deteriorating interiors. The vehicles in the lot were like relics of a bygone era, many belonging to soldiers who never returned from Vietnam, either killed in action or missing. Left unclaimed by families, these cars had become forgotten fragments of lives interrupted by war. Over the years, they deteriorated, succumbing to the elements, a slow descent into decay. Our duty was to safeguard this lot from vandals and thieves, a task that felt part memorial and part security detail. Several of the buildings within the lot were actively used for storing various military gear and equipment, necessitating our nightly inspections. The lot was massive, its size comparable to a couple dozen football fields. Enclosed by a towering 12-foot fence crowned with barbed wire, our routine usually involved a perimeter drive, peering through the chain-link fence for any signs of disturbance. Then came that night in June, a night that would etch itself in my memory. As we patrolled near the area where the old cars were parked, my partner, Wireman, abruptly stopped the truck. He'd seen a silhouette moving within the fenced area. "Did you see that?" he asked, pointing out the shape in the darkness. It took me a moment to spot it, the moonlight feeble that night. But as soon as I focused, the figure moved, startlingly quick. This wasn't an animal. Its size and agility suggested something else, something that shouldn't have been there. We maneuvered the truck's mounted spotlights, trying to illuminate the intruder. But it was elusive, darting behind cars, avoiding the light with an almost cunning agility. Our procedure in such situations was clear. While Wireman kept the lights trained on the area, I radioed in a potential security breach. I wasn't sure what to expect. Perhaps teenagers causing mischief or a thief. We drove off the road, stopping near the nearest gate. I stepped out to unlock the padlock, a task made challenging by the multitude of keys on my ring, each a sentinel to the numerous locks across the base. As I fumbled with the keys, I tried to peer into the darkness, hindered by the truck's headlights casting their bright glare directly behind me. Wireman, meanwhile, had exited the truck, using the spotlight and his flashlight to scan the area. Finally, the padlock yielded, and I pulled the chain free, pushing the gate open. Glancing back, I saw Wireman climbing back into the driver's seat, ready to drive in as I led the way through the gate. The atmosphere was tense. The darkness around us seemed to deepen, making the unknown inside the fence all the more ominous. The idea of confronting whatever or whoever was lurking in there sent a chill down my spine. Yet, as a soldier, it was my duty to face whatever lay ahead, regardless of the uncertainty and potential danger. This was just another night at Fort Campbell, or so I thought. But this night was different. It carried with it a sense of foreboding, a prelude to events that would challenge my understanding of the ordinary, and plunge me into encounters far beyond the realm of the usual night patrols. As I stood there, the stillness of the night was shattered by a scream, a sound so harrowing and unearthly that it froze me in my tracks. Growing up in the countryside, I'd heard all manner of nocturnal wildlife, but nothing could have prepared me for this. It wasn't just unsettling, it was a scream that seemed to echo from a realm of nightmares, not of this earth. I felt a chill cascade down my spine, my muscles tensing involuntarily. In that moment, my instincts were at war with themselves. The darkness ahead took on a new, ominous quality. It's hard to describe, but everything in my field of vision became sharply contrasted. The cars, the buildings, all turned into varying shades of black, creating an unsettling tableau of darkness. My vision seemed to tunnel, focusing intently on the expanse before me. My heart was pounding in my ears as I took a few hesitant steps back, trying to force my eyes to adjust, to see anything that might be lurking in the shadows. Then, more screams erupted, each one adding to the surreal horror of the situation. My mind struggled to process what was happening, but my military training kicked in, grounding me despite the fear. I counted the screams. 5, maybe 6. This meant there were several of them out there, hidden in the darkness. A feeling of dread washed over me as I realized they were probably watching us, outnumbering us significantly. I cursed myself for being so exposed under the truck's headlights. In a matter of seconds, my survival instincts took over. I shoved the keyring into my left hand, holding the flashlight, and drew my pistol with my right. Wireman, observing my actions, quickly exited the truck, his pistol at the ready, pointing into the darkness where the screams had come from. I continued to retreat towards the truck, scanning the area. Then, another scream pierced the night, its source seemingly the same as the first. Suddenly, a figure rose up from the darkness. It was unnaturally tall, dwarfing the cars it stood among. For a moment, it was motionless. Then it lunged forward, closing the distance between us with terrifying speed. Wireman and I didn't hesitate. We scrambled back into the truck. Wireman spun the wheel hard, aiming the truck back towards the road as he floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched in protest, and we shot forward. In that moment, despite our fear, we hesitated to open fire. A part of me still clung to the hope that these could be just deranged homeless people or drunken teenagers. How wrong I was. As we drove parallel to the fence line, only a narrow gap separating us from it, my mind raced, trying to make sense of what we had just encountered. The reality of our situation was beginning to sink in. We were dealing with something far beyond the scope of any ordinary night patrol at Fort Campbell. The shadows of the base had come alive with a terror I had never known. A terror that seemed to defy all logic and understanding. As Wireman pushed the truck to gain speed, I dared a glance back to my right. My heart nearly stopped. The creature was running alongside us, separated only by the fence, barely 10 feet away. Its size was staggering, dwarfing any creature I had seen in the wild. Instinctively, I aimed my flashlight at it through the open window, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was no man, that was for sure, but it ran upright on 2 legs. Next to the 12-foot fence, its height was apparent, easily over 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in short, dark brown hair, but its head was different, rounded at the top and distinctly non-human. The face, also brown, appeared smooth, possibly skin rather than hair, with a discernible mouth and nose. It lacked the snout of a bear or the flat face of a gorilla. Its gait was unlike any bear's clumsy lope or a human's stride. Instead, it ran with a terrifying efficiency, its upper body barely moving, arms not swinging, but its legs, stocky and powerful, propelled it forward with remarkable speed. The sheer brute force of the creature was palpable. As we raced down the old road, I could hear its heavy breathing over the sound of the truck's engine, a deep, grunting noise that spoke of tremendous lung capacity. My flashlight's beam revealed something even more unsettling. It wasn't looking where it was running, it was looking directly at me, an expression of anger in its eyes. Unlike a deer's eyes that would reflect light, its eyes seemed different, possibly even having whites like a human's. Startled out of my focus by Wireman's shout, I snapped back to reality, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Wireman's face mirrored my shock, glancing between the creature and the road as we finally began to outpace it. My gaze returned to the creature just in time to see it leap, astonishingly high, onto the 12-foot fence, only to tumble on the other side, possibly snagged by the barbed wire. As we drove away, I saw it struggling to get up, entangled in what seemed to be barbed wire it had pulled down from the fence. We drove in silence, both of us processing the surreal encounter. What were we supposed to report? How could we even begin to explain? Wireman, almost mechanically, continued to the next patrol point. Despite the shock, we knew we had to complete our rounds. And yet, there was an unspoken understanding that we'd have to return to close the open gate. When we finally radioed in at the next location, questions were asked about the previous site. Thinking quickly, I lied that the radio had malfunctioned. I reported that the situation was under control, promising to have the radio checked. Inside, my mind was reeling. The reality of what we had just experienced was almost too much to comprehend. A creature of nightmares, not just a figment of imagination, but a living, breathing entity that had just violently disrupted our night patrol at Fort Campbell. After completing our patrol and with the first light of dawn breaking, Wireman and I returned to the station. There was a silent agreement between us to go back and secure the gate we'd left open. Our encounter from the night before still lingered heavily in our minds. True to our fears, we found the barbed wire exactly where we had seen the creature leap over the fence. Now, in the safety of daylight, we felt a bit more courageous. We drove through the open gate, staying inside the truck with our pistols drawn, not taking any chances. We conducted a thorough sweep of the area but found no trace of whatever it was we had seen the night before. After securing the area, I quickly locked the gate and we returned to the station. I knew without a doubt that we couldn't report what we had actually seen. My previous experiences had taught me that the military doesn't take kindly to soldiers reporting sightings of the unexplained. Wireman seemed to be on the same page and agreed to keep silent about the incident. Whether he ever spoke of it again, I can't say, but I suspect I'm not the only one haunted by that night. At the station, we reported the damage to the barbed wire, but offered no explanation for its cause. Over the years, I've often reflected on that incident. Had I been alone, I might have convinced myself it was a figment of my imagination, but it wasn't a hallucination. Wireman saw it too. The question of what it was exactly never left my mind. The term Bigfoot has been ridiculed over time, but how else could I describe what we saw? A group of them, maybe a family, right there at Fort Campbell. This incident left me with lingering questions. Was that area part of their territory, or were they just passing through? Every night I returned to patrol that lot, the fear was palpable. And why did it confront us instead of fleeing? Most Bigfoot encounters suggest they're not aggressive, but perhaps the aggressive ones simply aren't reported because the witnesses don't make it back. I've listened to stories of people going missing in the woods, and it sends shivers down my spine. What if they encountered something like we did? Had I been alone or had that creature reached us, I shudder to think how differently that night might have ended. These questions, and many more, often race through my mind as I try to find sleep. I realize sharing this story might not do much for my credibility, but it's the truth. And this wasn't the only strange thing I experienced on the dark roads of Fort Campbell. As for any bloopers or humorous anecdotes to lighten the mood, there are none. This recounting has been precise, without any errors or mispronunciations. I wish I had something more lighthearted to offer as a conclusion. But this story, with all its unsettling details, is true. Even the small, seemingly unrelated incidents, like the soldier with the prostitute at the perimeter fence or the naked night runner, all were part of the fabric of life at Fort Campbell, contributing to the eerie, sometimes inexplicable atmosphere that pervaded my time there. In my time with the Marine Corps, I never encountered anything like what I saw at Fort Campbell. It's not something you'd expect to come across, yet it's not entirely surprising either, considering the bizarre things that can happen in the military. But speaking of strange occurrences, I do have a lighter story to share from my first duty station in Hawaii, on Oahu. As part of a reconnaissance platoon, we spent a significant amount of time in the field, more so than other traditional Marine units. Near us was an Army base, Schofield Barracks, with an adjacent training area called East Range. This area was incredibly rough, all ridges and mountains, right at the edge of the jungle. It was so inhospitable, the perfect place for grueling training. It rained incessantly, making it a generally miserable place to be. One evening, I wasn't with this particular group, but a team of Marines was out on a training operation in East Range. These ops were treated like real-world missions with specific objectives. Sometimes they'd be inserted by helicopter, other times they'd leave from a base camp and march into the jungle, avoiding the only roads in the area. On this occasion, one of the guys, against regulations, had brought his cell phone. Their objective was near the perimeter fence, close to a road. In a moment of audacity, or maybe just craving a taste of normalcy, This Marine decided to order a pizza. He called a local pizza place, gave them a GPS point near the fence, and added special instructions for the delivery. Imagine the scene. A 6-man recon team, camouflaged and hidden in the jungle, orders a pizza to be delivered in the middle of nowhere. The delivery driver was instructed to drive to a specific point, where someone would run out of the jungle, hop over the fence, pay for the pizza, and disappear back into the wilderness. Sure enough, the pizza guy arrives, and true to the plan, a Marine in full camo gear dashes out of the jungle, hops the fence, hands over the cash, grabs the pizza and drinks, and runs back into the darkness. I often wonder what went through that delivery driver's mind. Was this just another day on the job for him, delivering pizzas to Marines popping out of the jungle? Such moments of levity were essential, a way to break the monotony and harshness of training. It's stories like these, amidst the backdrop of military life, that keep things interesting and sometimes surreal.